Hello, David McMillan here, retired smuggler, nearly 40 years in the drug wars. Where are we now? I've been thinking of 1997. What was happening that month? Well, the Russians were in trouble in space. William S. Burroughs, the Beat Generation writer, had died. There were some massacres here and there around the world. And in Britain there seemed a bit of a new atmosphere around with what was a kind of touchy-feely Labour, that is, slightly vaguely socialist Prime Minister Tony Blair. Something else happened at the end of the month, another death. It was Princess Diana, and I remember it because it changed the city. Within hours, people were calling each other all over town. Yeah, it was an unusual death. Car accident, and you can imagine with Princess Diana and her boyfriend, the wealthy son of an Arabian businessman who lived in London for many years. Dodi Fayed had died in the car as well, due to poor driving by a drunk driver who was in charge. But that doesn't really matter. What I remember most is the effect it had on the city. There were flowers draped all around the cathedral. Traffic was almost brought to a halt. It took me, more than an hour to go 5 miles. I got out of my taxi and walked. And in walking, I saw the faces of people. People were moved, upset. Her Majesty the Queen was criticised for not showing enough compassion. What was going on? Many people at the time were surprised by the mood, the intense feeling, a kind of wave that had come through, an intensity that was brought to mind by the trial of Ramzi Youssef, a World Trade Center bomber that began that month as well. Yet a kind of passionate suffering. And I'm reminded of that now because although it was quite a different thing to the feeling now, the mood was somehow similar. For my life, it was just business as usual. I was living in a mews house. I had a little network going on of smuggling. Not a huge thing, a few kilos here and there in Colombia, Afghanistan, Pakistan. But I had about 5 passports. My world was quite in order. I didn't know that soon I would be dissolved into the torture dungeons of Karachi. But that's got nothing to do with the mood at the time. I was optimistic. Though when everything is going well, that's the time you think things might suddenly and unexpectedly turn bad. What was all the weeping about Diana's death about? I mean, why was it so many people and such a national thing? In fact, an international thing. Well, let's move ahead to today, 2020, and in June. We've got another move coming on. My life's very different. I'm retired, and the crime, drug crime, has become more exclusive. Only the bigs are involved now. Lockdown and the change of international flights have meant the independent smugglers have all had to, if not lock down, then certainly go quiet, go dark. No, the mood around followed from the death at the hands of a policeman of a man in Minneapolis. As just about everybody would know, that is, everybody outside of someplace which is war-torn or people are really starving who have problems forced in their face. That is the majority of the world, I guess, in a way. But probably half the world certainly knows that George Floyd was killed in about a 9-minute period by the policeman leaning on him, suffocating him. Now, a death by African American is not unusual, and in fact, a death from a policeman's hands is not unusual in the United States. So why did this one get so much? So much of the wave going across the world? Well, in part, it is the media immediacy. We can attribute just about everything to that world movement. Of course, the event itself was pretty awful, but what underscored it was the timing, the long minutes going past. It's one thing to see a horror, it's quite another thing to endure it for minutes on end. Much of the world, for the last 3-4 months, have been on a kind of lockdown. That is, kept away from their jobs, their normal life, confined to their houses, restricted in their movements, compelled to wear masks in public and take special precautions. People were obeying those rules largely. They were being obedient, not as obedient as they were in China, where it was almost eradicated, but really, for Westerners, quite obedient. They did what they were told. They behaved themselves. They were good. They allowed the hospitals to cope with the influx, which was what being obedient meant. Let's not all rush to get sick at once. So, as the lockdown eased, this story came up. And what effect did that have, and why then? Well, everybody will say to me, David, what do you want about? It's the cause. Black Lives Matter. Indeed, yes. But it's not a new cause. It's been around for a while. And it's perfectly valid. But here's the thing. I couldn't help feeling that people, having been obedient and obeyed the law, felt they were due some reward. And the only reward from the state is something of change. Sure, big government, the rich ones, were paying people to some degree to stay home and compensating those who were suffering in a small way, though their lives were not changed for the better over it. So, having been so obedient, people expected a reward for them being true to civilized behavior. And the best reward would be action taken on some outrage. That entitlement right across the Western world is so strong, it has brought people out day after day, week after week. Of course, it's very managed. What you see, well, I saw Al Sharpton plugging his ministry during what was supposed to be a eulogy for a man who was unjustly killed. Was it necessary to put in a plug at the time? Perhaps not. No, where we are now is in a very strange position of having scaled the mountain of an attacking disease and to be alive. But the thing about scaling a mountain is the only reward is being at the top of it. You can't really expect anything more than that. And if you're not satisfied with survival, then the whole thing might seem quite pointless. So why the great demand? Well, I suppose one thing could be a sense of disappointment that having achieved this survival, having played by the rules, there seems nothing more than just being in the same position. And a lot of people have spoken about the new world, the new way of working, the new structure to everything. Well, working from home, staying at home, not doing very much. Also rather unsatisfying. So we have this wave. But look back to yourselves if you feel that wave, or if you felt that wave. perhaps you felt you should be making a change, not just the state. And when there was nothing available, when you basically were in the same position you always were, but slightly worse off, that can generate a rage. Sure, have anger, but direct it where it does some good. Direct it into controlled thought. That would be better. Oh, and by the way, various movements have morphed a little. At the moment, people are running around being iconoclasts. Traditionally, they were the people that destroyed religious icons, iconoclast wreckage. And that's been going on for centuries. It was done in the old days, in the few hundred years into Christianity, to prove that somebody was holier than the next guy. I will break the statue because it's impure. It's something in Islam as well. But at the moment, it is pulling down statues of people who were slave traders. Yes, there's absolutely no connection really between those days and this, except the continuation of history, which always has a connection. But could you feel anything by that? Perhaps I'm not qualified to talk, but I am in the sense that I'm a leper of my own kind. I might not be branded from birth, and all my leprosy, public shame, was brought about by my own actions rather than imposed upon me, but I just mention having been in chains and called white trash and been in Asian dungeons. I mention these things because even though I was not faultless in bringing this about by any means, but I had the experience. I suppose our sense of the unjust within our own lives depends on timing. If our father was unjustly robbed of his fortune, you'd feel that. Our grandfather, yes, it affected the family for 2 generations. Great-granddad, great-grandmother was raped by the Cossacks. We can keep going back, but I think like applying for an Irish passport. If you weren't born there, they draw the line at great-grandparents. Well, up until recently they did. One of the things I knew from the old days. So perhaps we should draw the line there too. Otherwise, statues of Julius Caesar must come down because he was certainly a slave owner. At the moment, people are very keen to look at history and its effect on modern times, but broaden that view. Go back a few centuries and see, most of it is luck, circumstance. We don't have any great forefathers. They're all up to some mischief or other. And who was it? Was it Balzac who said every great fortune depended on a crime or began with a crime? Yes, depends how you broaden the definition of a crime, but we get his point. Most of the lords and nobles from the old days, they gained their fortunes by being complete scoundrels around the world. Sure, in their older days they did good things with their wealth. That's expected if you're rich enough. Philanthropy is what you do to clean your past, and you get rewarded for it one way or another. Yet it's true enough, we little humans have no sense of time. We cannot imagine the great shift of tectonic plates around the earth creating mountains. And we look at layers of stone and simply cannot imagine the millions of years. When we see a fossil, we don't know that it's actually a replica of the bone that was once there, transformed, yet preserved in image only. It's not the thing itself. Indeed, the feeling we have at the moment is perhaps not the thing itself. It's a dissatisfaction that we have done something and not been rewarded. Well, I don't know, if you're like me, you would have known from the outset that no good deed goes unpunished, and that's the way it will always be. So forget about trying to comprehend time, just accept the numbers on it. And what we can do with time is plan our future time a little better. I hope so. Good night.